And momentarily, your lines will be placed on a listen-only mode till the question and answer portion. At that time, please press star 1 on your phone if you would like to ask a question. And I would like to remind all parties the call is now being recorded. Once again, please continue to stand by.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Seisloff. I'm the PAO for Commercial Crew and ISS here at Kennedy. We are this evening doing the post-flight readiness review teleconference from here at Kennedy Space Center. We have with us today Ken Bowersox, the Associate Administrator for Space Operations Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters. We have Steve Stich, Program Manager for the Commercial Crew Program. We have Joel Montalbano, Program Manager for the International Space Station Program. Emily Nelson, Chief Flight Director. Bill Gerstenmaier, Vice President of SpaceX. Eric Vanderwall, the Houston Office Team Leader for the European Space Agency. Takayoshi Nishikawa, Director of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency's Houston office. And we will start off with Ken Bowersox.
Thanks, Steve. Hey, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us on a Sunday. We started the FRR this morning at about 10:30 and just finished at 7. I know we delayed the start of our press conference probably a couple times, so I appreciate you for hanging on. It's hard to believe that it's been 25 years since we launched the first hardware for the International Space Station, and that we've had crews up there for more than 23 years. Throughout that time, safely launching and returning our crew members has been a critical priority. It's allowed us to maximize the benefits of our time on the International Space Station and to help us prepare for exploring deeper into space, to support the Artemis campaign, and also to build a commercial market in low Earth orbit. Today's review was very thorough. We talked about some of the technical items on the Falcon 9 rocket and the Dragon spacecraft. We talked about the readiness of the crew and space station, and even some of the science that the crew will conduct. At the end of the review, everybody polled go, and we're on track for a launch at 12:04 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday, March 1st from Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center. The team that's here with me today will give you more details about the review and some of the things we talked about, as well as the remaining pre-launch activities and upcoming work on station. I just want to emphasize that the flight readiness review is just one step, but it is an important step as we get closer to launch. And I want to thank all the team members that participated in that review today, and our international partners from ESA and JAXA, Roscosmos, the SpaceX teams, for all the hard work that it took to get here. And even though we pulled go today, we're constantly paying attention to what the rocket and spacecraft are telling us, so that we'll make sure that we launch when the crew and the spacecraft are ready to go, and we're ready to have a good flight to the space station and a good return. And with that, I'd like to pass to the Commercial Crew Program Manager, Steve Stich.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. It's an honor to be here representing our entire Commercial Crew Program team. I thank everybody for their interest in human spaceflight. As Ken said, we had a good FRR today. I thought it was very thorough, reviewing the Dragon, Falcon 9, and the pad systems. We also took a little time out. It was a beautiful day here in Florida, so there was a Starlink launch just a little after 5 p.m. local, so we took a little break to go out and watch SpaceX launch a Starlink off of Pad 40, which was really exciting as well. I would say, you know, we're on track for the launch. As Ken said, the launch is March 1st, 12:04 Eastern, which is really late on February 29th for most people. We would dock a day later at 7 a.m. on March the 2nd, 7 a.m. Eastern time. And of course, we have 2 backup opportunities. Again, another one on March the 1st in the evening on March 1st at 11:41 p.m. Eastern, and then another a day later, March 2nd, 11:16 p.m. Eastern. You know, we worked through a number of things. First of all, the amount of work that goes into a flight, it is truly incredible, and we just cover a small amount of that work at the agency FRR. Today we went through a few special topics at the agency FRR. You know, we've seen some skip stitching in the energy modulators, which is a system of the drogue parachutes that pulls the mains parachutes out. In fact, on CRS-29, we saw a little bit more of that on 4 of the 6 legs. We went through that, and we have really good flight rationale for Crew-7 return and Crew-8. We did some testing at Langley to confirm some worst cases, and we talked through that flight rationale today. You know, for this flight, this is the 5th flight of Endeavour. So we took a little extra time to talk through the work that we had done to make sure that we were ready to go fly that vehicle. And in particular, we had a number of special topics relative to the prop system. You know, we've had some valve corrosion in the oxidizer valves, both on the low pressure side, which is used on orbit, and then the side for aborts. We talked through the valve corrosion, and we've replaced many of the valves in the system. All the tank isolation valves are new, and then we replaced one of the manifold valves during the flow, and we've checked them all out as we loaded propellant, and the vehicle's in good shape there. We also replaced 5 of the Super Draco throttle valves, just as we've seen the corrosion build in the systems. They didn't meet the criteria to go fly those valves, and we replaced those as well. We went through last flight. On launch day, we saw a little blip in the pad systems of some oxidizer vapor. We went through that, and we talked about how we're prepared for that, and we're doing additional checks now in the hangar and at static fire day as well. We also talked about a new processing on one of the Draco nozzles, a little bit different anneal cycle or a heat treat cycle on that, and we got flight rationale for that as well. And then finally on Falcon 9, there has been some cracks on a weld that mates the TVC, the thrust vector control unit, to the thrust chamber assembly, and we talked about some cracking in there and how we had good flight rationale. SpaceX has done a good job going through that. We have a little bit of open work remaining coming out of the FRR. We have one exception with some non-conformances, I would say primarily in the composites area on the vehicle that we've got to go work through. SpaceX has done a thorough review of the composite system over a number of flights, and then we have a number of issues to close out, and we'll work through those at the Program Control Board later this week. We also have some paint discoloration on orbit that we'll work through. We've seen that in the survey. We're just going to take a little bit of abundance of precaution to look at that discoloration and make sure the thermal properties are okay for returning of the vehicle. So again, we had a good review today. Of course, following the Crew-8 launch, we'll return Crew-7, and the earliest undock time would be about 7 days or so after we dock Crew-8. So good review today. I want to thank the international partners, the ISS program, and all our team, and I'll hand it over to Joel Montalbano.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We had a really good review, and overall, the International Space Station is ready for the Crew-8 mission and ready for an early Friday morning launch. The docking will be to the forward port of the International Space Station, as Steve said, approximately 7 a.m. Eastern Time on March 2nd, with hatch opening about 2 hours after that. We'll do about a 5-day handover. After that, Crew-7 will come home, and Crew-8 will continue on board the International Space Station until the end of August. We fly these missions for science research, commercialization of low Earth orbit, and technology development. Many of you participate or listen to the NASA administrator talk to the crew about science recently. This Crew-8 will do about 250 experiments during their expedition. So again, looking forward to that. Space Station continues to be a busy place. Just a week ago, we had a nice progress docking. After Crew-7 undocks, just a handful of days later, we'll be focused on the SpaceX 30 Dragon cargo mission to the International Space Station. We have a Soyuz launch on March 21st, a Soyuz crew changeout, and then you'll have Soyuz landing on April 2nd. Huge thank you to my colleagues in the International Space Station program, the Commercial Crew program, all the support organizations at NASA and our international partners as well as our domestic partners. So all in all, we are ready and excited again for Crew-8. With that, I'll hand it over to Emily Nelson.
Thank you, Joel. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this evening. We had, as you've heard, a really good review today. We're in good shape for the Crew-8 launch and the Crew-7 return. Matt, Mike, Jeanette, and Alexander went into quarantine a little over a week ago. They've arrived at the Cape today while we were meeting, and we're looking ahead to a rehearsal of our day of launch activities, an exercise we call the dry dress. We'll have that rehearsal tomorrow evening, let the crew walk through the steps of getting into the spacecraft and getting buckled in. And then the rest of this week from here to launch, the crew will get regular updates on predicted launch day conditions and then get to spend some time with their families ahead of the big day. Meanwhile, on board the ISS, Crew-7 is getting into handover preparations and getting the space station ready to receive a new crew. They're participating in their final training exercises for their descent and landing. After 182 days on orbit, Jasmine, Andy, Satoshi, and Constantine are doing really well. They've accomplished a great deal in their mission, and we're looking forward to getting them safely home. Our mission control teams in both crews are ready for Crew-8's launch and for Crew-7's return. And with that, I'll hand over to Bill Gerstenmaier at SpaceX.
Yeah, it's a real honor to be here today representing the SpaceX team and participating in this flight readiness review. This will be our third launch to the space station this year, which is pretty amazing. Again, this is the fifth flight of the Dragon spacecraft, as we've heard before, and the first flight of the Falcon for this vehicle. Steve covered many of the technical topics we reviewed. I would say we discovered a lot of those topics by other flights, and we get a chance to experiment and see the hardware in other flights. So there's a tremendous advantage of flying as often as we do and flying the variety of missions that we get to go fly. It's really nice to try some things on cargo vehicles and then see how they work and then make sure that we're getting the right performance that we need for the crew missions. We also just completed the Axiom post-flight review in Hawthorne. We did a very detailed review of that mission. We learned a lot about the Dragon vehicle that has direct application to this mission, so I think that helps, again, buy down risk and make sure we're ready to go fly. We know the open items we need to close out and to get ready to go fly, and we'll get those worked with the ISS program and with the Commercial Crew program and get those closed out before we go fly. So again, I think human space flight's a really humbling and difficult activity for all of us. We need to pay super close attention to everything. We will, just as Ken talked about. The review started with the crew talking to us a little bit about the complexity of the flights we're doing, the teamwork that's required, and the trust. And it's a real honor to be part of the team that's earned the trust of the crew to go fly. And we, as part of the SpaceX team, will do our best to make sure the vehicles are ready to go fly and support this wonderful endeavor of flying to the space station and operating and doing fundamental research in space. And with that, I'll hand over to ESA, to Eric Vanderwall.
Thank you, Bill. I would like to start by expressing the satisfaction of working in such a great partnership with NASA, SpaceX, and also our other ISS partners. The Crew-7 return will mark the end of a very successful Huygens mission with our ESA astronaut Andreas Mogensen. A great science program, very valuable for Europe, important for Denmark. It's also the 5th flight of an ESA astronaut on the Dragon vehicle. We're so excited about that. It was just last month that we returned another ESA astronaut that flew on the Axiom 3 mission. Busy months for us, but great science, great opportunities, and we're obviously looking forward to see Andy Mogensen coming back early next month. With that, I will pass it on to my Japanese colleague, Takayoshi Nishikawa.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening. My name is Taka Nishikawa, Director of JAXA Houston office. I'm here on behalf of JAXA ISS Program Manager, Mr. Junichi Sakai. First, I'd like to thank NASA, SpaceX, and everyone who has been contributing the ISS operations and the stable transportation of the crews. JAXA astronaut Dr. Furukawa Satoshi is about to complete his second long-duration mission, exceeding 355 days, which is almost 1 year. Through teamwork with our flight controllers and engineers in Japan, he has conducted various experiments such as JAXA's second space drone called Interval and the water recovery system inside our Japanese experiment module, Kibo. Also, he was able to contribute to acquiring technology for the future international exploration, as well as promoting participation in future activities in low Earth orbit by the private sectors. In addition, we have been able to provide opportunities for the next generation with our unique programs such as Asian Tri-0G, which is conducting simple science experiments designed by students, and the Kibo Robotic Programming Challenge, in which we have students develop programming codes to maneuver NASA's space drone, the Astro B, inside the ISS. We really appreciate NASA's support of these programs. Today, we debuted the Crew-8 launch readiness. Matthew, Mike, Janet, and Alexander have flown in from Houston and are eager to board the Crew Dragon and fly to the ISS. We are confident that their mission will be successful. Also, as already mentioned, the Crew-7 return was reviewed, and Jasmine, Andy, Konstantin, and Satoshi are ready for their return. We are looking forward to seeing them soon here on Earth, though Satoshi mentioned he would like to stay longer on the ISS. Finally, we want to share with you, we recently succeeded in launching the H3 rocket, which is Japan's new flagship rocket. With this success, we believe that we have made significant progress toward launching HTVX, which is the new supply vehicle for the ISS program. We will continue to contribute to the ISS program through close collaboration with the international partners and commercial partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We're now going to move into the media Q&A. As a reminder, please use *1 on your phone to enter the question queue. And when you are called upon, please state to whom you're addressing your question and limit your question to one question at a time so we can get through as many as possible. And first up this evening, we have Bill Harwood from CBS News.
Hey, thank you very much. This is for Steve Stich, I think. You mentioned today's Starlink launch. Can you remind us of what's the minimum separation between another SpaceX flight and a commercial crew mission? In other words, can they launch another flight within 24 hours of your flight, to allow time for data review, et cetera? And I apologize, I'm going to squeeze in a second one. Can you give us any details on what the issues are with composites and discoloration? I mean, I'm assuming they'll get resolved, but I don't really understand what the issues are. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll try to take the second question second, of course. And first of all, relative to our standoff, what we've set up is it's a pretty busy week. If you just think about tonight, we're actually rolling the vehicle out to the pad, and then that'll set us up for a crew dry dress really early on Tuesday morning right at the launch time. And then after that, we'll do a hot fire of the vehicle, right, of the first stage of Falcon 9. That'll occur about 4:04 in the morning that same day. So what we've set up is to allow our teams time to review all of that data and make sure that our launch vehicle and the Dragon is ready to go based on the dry dress and static fire. We have a 48-hour standoff, so we will not allow another SpaceX launch to be within 48 hours of our launch. And that's worked well for us to allow us to, in particular with this launch time around midnight, to review the data from our static fire, our dry dress, the Dragon, and then also that 48 hours will give us time to review that data for the Starlink flight. So that's our posture for the program. In terms of the special topics or the things that we're still working on, the containments, I would say it's a number of things relative to special, like fasteners, for example. On the composites, we have a number of fasteners that hold the composite panels on or have fittings associated with the composites. SpaceX has gone off and looked at, there's a certain, for every single fastener that's like a bolt or a screw that goes into that composite, there's a certain length of that particular fastener needs to be to have enough thread engagement. So we're going back and double checking that based on a tool that they've developed that now has a little bit different calculation for that. In terms of the vehicle on orbit that has a little discoloration on the SPAM, we think that's related to perhaps some residue tape that was left there, so it's discolored a little bit and yellowed. What you worry about there is, can it really reflect the heat that it should? And then we have a couple other items relative to a containment, looking at the fit up of a pod panel, a cartridge gap interface, and then when you apply the fastener to that, is the loads correct in that area? I would say it's a matter of caution, going and double checking a lot of calculations that's been done over the last few years. SpaceX has kind of done a real thorough review of end-to-end of all the composite panels on the vehicle, and so it's really just double checking things. And as you said, I suspect we'll close these out Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah, and I would add, like on the discoloration, the concern there is the emissivity of the vehicle changes, and as Steve said, the temperature changes. So what happens is it gets the panels a little warmer than we've anticipated, so there's a little bit of thermal stress built up in that. And then when we actually land and splash down, then that stress gets added on top of the landing loads, so there's a little bit less capability of the composite panel depending upon the discoloration. And we'll calculate that. We saw it on quad 2 from the cameras. We'll do a more detailed inspection tomorrow, look at the other quads. I would expect to probably see some discoloration on those other panels as well. And then we'll go ahead and figure out what that means, and it may change a little bit our landing flight rules, but in terms of winds, but it'll be a very small amount. It doesn't add a whole lot of stress to the system. But we'll look at that and review that with the program and make sure everybody's in agreement, and we've got a good conditions to bring the crew home in.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go over to Will Robinson-Smith with Spaceflight Now.
Yes, hi. Thanks so much for taking the time to answer our questions this evening. One for Steve Stich and perhaps Bill Gerstenmaier as well. Bill had mentioned that a lot was learned from the recent flight of the Dragon used for the AX-3 mission. I was wondering if you could go into a little more detail on what exactly was gleaned from that Dragon flight and how that is applying to both this forthcoming Crew-8 mission as well as the finishing up of the development on the next for Dragon? Thanks.
I could bring up a couple things, and Steve can then add. I would say, first of all, we had a fairly long return on Axiom 3, so we had about a 48-hour return. So the crew was in the Dragon capsule for an extended period of time, so that got us able to take a good look at the environmental control system, to look at the waste management system, and make sure all those systems were functioning operationally correctly and the thermal management system was working correct. So we got a good chance to see that the Dragon capsule design is really strong in terms of taking care of the crew and making sure the environment that they live in is safe for them in transit. We also got a chance to take a look at our parachute system and performance. We recovered all the hardware. We took a look at the parachute systems. They all looked good. We didn't see any of the energy modulator problems that we've seen on previous flights. Again, we just don't have a lot of data there, so we're continuing to work with NASA to understand the best configuration. But I think those are probably two examples of things we learned from Axiom 3 that have direct application to Crew-8 and actually buy down risk for the Crew-8 mission. And Steve, you can add any more if you'd like.
Yeah, I was just looking at the post-flight data here, Bill, and I do agree with you. I think, total free flight time of any Dragon 2 mission, I think Axiom 3 had that. It was a bit of a long uphill from launch to dock. I think it was about almost 37 hours from launch to dock, which, again, as you said, with the crew in the vehicle, puts the stress on the ecosystem and the waste system and really crew living in Dragon. And as you talked about, from undocked to landing, it was about 47 hours or so. So, again, the longest time. So that's good for us to collect data on the NASA side. And if we ever had to fly those kind of durations, I think it gives us confidence in that. As Bill said, the parachute system, we get to look at those every flight. NASA flew the WB-57 aircraft to look at the parachute system. We had some camera technology also on the recovery ship to view the parachutes. I would say the parachutes were very normal on that flight. All the inflation of the mains were normal, and we got to look at the energy modulators, as Bill said afterwards, and those didn't have any what we call skip stitching or shredding at all. So that gives us some confidence moving forward for our flight. I think those were probably the big things that, and again, I did look at the data as well, and our team participated, and it was a very thorough review of Dragon this past week.
Thank you. And next, Stephen Clark at Ars Technica.
Hi, thanks. Stephen Clark here. Thanks for doing this. First of all, my question is probably for Steve Stich. I think we're within a couple of months now of Starliner crew flight test. If everything goes according to plan, just wondering if you can give us an update on how the certification is going, the final reviews for that mission, and how's the spacecraft looking? Any update you can provide on processing for an April launch date, and do you have a launch date in April? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a pretty exciting time for commercial crew. Not only are we in the middle of the Crew-8 processing with that vehicle headed out to the launch pad, but for the crewed flight test, we're targeting April the 22nd right now. That launch vehicle has started stacking over at Complex 41, so we started putting the launch vehicle up, and next week the ULA will start working on attaching the solids to that vehicle. The spacecraft, the Starliner, is over in the Boeing facility where they process the vehicle. It has been loaded with Golden, which is the fluid that's used for heat rejection of their system. It's in the process of drying that system out and making sure the moisture content's good to go. The spacecraft is in really good shape, not much work left to go. Cargo installation will be starting very soon. All the cargo is down here for that flight. The next big activity is to load propellant on the vehicle, and that'll happen probably in the mid-March timeframe, and so that's the next big processing of the vehicle. We've worked through a number of the issues that delayed the launch from last summer and closed those out. We had a successful parachute test in early January with some modifications to the parachute system to improve the strength of those parachutes. That went well. We reviewed that data. We closed out all the remaining in-flight anomalies from OFT2 at the Program Control Board recently. We have remediated the P213 tape, which is a flammable tape that was in various areas in the upper and lower dome of Starliner. That work is complete and behind us and been approved by the Program Control Board. And then finally, we had a couple of issues with some valves that we worked through on the active thermal control system. Those are in good shape for the flight, and those are ready to go too. So those three big issues that we had last summer have been resolved, and we're in the middle of some final certification work on the parachutes and a few other things. But right now things are looking good for toward the end of April to launch Starliner. So we're excited about Crew-8 having Starliner come and visit.
If I may, is there any more parachute tests before that launch date, or was that one in January the final one before launch?
No, that was the final test, the one we did in January. We needed one test with the new upgraded system. Remember, we changed the joints on the suspension lines to strengthen the main canopies, and then also there were some soft links that needed to be strengthened, which we flew on 2 parachutes on that test, and those all looked good. We inspected all the hardware after that parachute test at Yuma, and that hardware all looked great.
Thank you. And next we have Irene Klotz from Aviation Week.
Thanks. Good evening. I was wondering if you also had target launch dates for both the Aerospace Dream Chaser and the new HTV-X. And for Bill, could you provide a little more detail about the valve corrosion issue? Is that a function of age or environment, or what that was about? And also the weld cracks, which I heard correctly, that's a Falcon 9 issue. And since this is a new rocket, I wasn't quite sure what that was about either. Thanks.
This is Joel. For Dream Chaser, be the, I'll say the second quarter of this year. Right now they're doing environmental testing at the Armstrong Test Facility. They're scheduled to complete that in the March timeframe, and then they move to Kennedy Space Center. So we'll be watching that activity and watching that processing, and when those guys are ready, we'll fly them. And then I'll hand over to my JAXA colleague for the HTV-X question.
Yeah, as for the HTV-X, based on the successful test flight number 2, we will schedule HTV-X through the international coordination. Actually, we will launch it as soon as possible.
And in terms of the valves, I think the corrosion is probably more just the exposure of the valves to the nitrogen tetroxide combined with some environmental things. So we put some purges in place to prevent that contamination and buildup from occurring. Those purges have been pretty effective. As Steve said, we removed a couple valves and changed them out. We'll tear down the other valves that we pulled out, take a look at them, and see if there's anything we can learn there. Again, there could be some combination of use, but I think it's more how do we keep the environment, the valve, pristine around the valve and prevent that. We may make some design changes to the valves in the future to work on that area. In terms of weld cracking, there's some of the discussions there were on where the thrust vector control attaches to the nozzles that moves the nozzles around on both M1D and also on MVAC. It turns out that some of that cracking actually occurs during the welding process. It takes a lot of temperature to actually get that weld in place. And when that weld gets put in place, sometimes there's some small internal cracks that can occur in that weld. We have a small little borescope hole that we're able to go in to that behind and look behind that weld and verify that crack is not a concern. Turns out we have a lot of capability in that weld. The cracks are occurring in the middle of the weld region. The high stress regions are at the end, and we don't have any cracking at the end, so we have plenty of margin in these systems. So even though it's a fairly new system, it's not an age-related cracking per se, but it's actually probably part of the manufacturing process, and we'll figure out a way to dial in the manufacturing process to make it more effective and not have these cracks. But right now we have plenty of margin, and we should be fine moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Gina Sunseri from ABC News.
I'm not sure who this is for, but it's sort of a follow-up to Bill's question. We watched the Crew-8 date change several times. How much of a challenge is it scheduling launches these days?
I I can start with the date change on Crew-8. We between the ISS program, Commercial Crew program, we were trying to sort of thread a needle, I would say, with the launch date. The Intuitive Machines launch that happened on, I think it was the 15th of February, was very important to NASA. And so what we were trying to do is preserve as much as we could the launch opportunities. They had 3 launch opportunities, the 14th, 15th, and 16th of February, to target their South Pole lunar landing. And then they had 3 more opportunities in March. And so what we were trying to do for a while is, as that vehicle got processed for Intuitive Machines and the testing happened at the pad, SpaceX provided obviously the ride on Falcon 9 and loaded the vehicle with LOX and methane. We were trying to protect for both of those. So we adjusted our date a few different times to protect as many options as we could, and then we finally, moved to March 1st, where we stand tonight. Once we figured out the Intuitive Machines had launched, and congratulations to Intuitive Machines and SpaceX on a great mission, we were able to solidify our date and let them have their opportunity, and it all worked out really well.
Yeah, this is Joel. I'll just add, we have 17 ISS missions this year. It's calendar year. So it is like the coolest game of Tetris to try and manage all this. And then you add in, the non-ISS missions and try and manage across the different launch pad availability. But it is a busy place on board the International Space Station, but we work these very well in partnership with the other programs within the NASA agency, as well as the other initiatives throughout the government and SpaceX and the other launch providers.
And I'll add one more thing on manifest complexity. I mean, even as we go forward, like we talk about the FR being the first step for Crew-8, but we're targeting the Crew-8 launch on March the 1st, and then we'll stay docked and have the handover with Crew-7. Crew-7 we would no earlier than undock around March the 8th, and then if you look forward from that, there's a cargo mission right after that, CRS-30, which would launch in mid-March. We'll stay docked for about a month or so, and then that's right on the heels of where we're talking about the Boeing mission flying for CFT. And before we go, launch that flight, obviously CRS-30 has to undock and land, and then we have to do a port relocation with the Crew-8 vehicle to move it from the forward port to Zenith to allow Starliner to dock. So some future launch date adjustments for even Starliner might happen just because of this busy time frame in ISS. This first part of the year has really been jam-packed, I would say, with the Axiom mission, now Crew-8, Crew-7 return, the cargo mission, which is important, and then CFT.
Thank you. And next, Tarek Malik from Space.com.
Hello. Yes, thank you, Tarek Malik, Space.com. I think my follow-up is to Steve, if possible, just to clarify what you had mentioned on the valve replacements themselves. As I understood it, you mentioned that you replaced 5 of the Super Draco valves on the Dragon vehicle, and then you mentioned some other valves themselves. And I was just curious where those were, either on Dragon or on the Falcon vehicle, and how many additional valves, if they were in fact additional valves, just to clarify that up. Thank you.
Yeah, all the valves are on Dragon. They're in what's called the service section of Dragon. When you pull the panels off, the pod panels come off around the vehicle where you have the Super Dracos. Those come off every flight, and then we can get access to the valve. So we replaced all what's called the tank isolation valve. So there's a valve that is in between the propellant tank where the oxidizer is and the manifold itself. Then we replaced 1 oxidizer manifold valve, and then 5 what we call the Super Draco throttle valves. And those valves are used to throttle the Super Draco engines should you need them for an abort. So all these were related to corrosion. I would say all of them were done out of an abundance of precaution. What we do is we sort of trend the valve performance when we do the checkouts of the system. Over at Dragonland, we look at how the valve's performing. We watch the valve timing, and if the timing starts to look a little unusual, we will proactively replace those valves.
Thank you.
And I think, again, once we get a chance to take a look at the actual valve itself, we'll see if there's a real problem there or this timing difference is just a normal variation in timing. So in the future, we may not have to change as many valves. So we'll, again, use this as a chance to get data as well as understand. So as Steve said, it was out of an abundance of caution. Essentially, we removed these valves to take a look at them.
Thank you. And next we'll have Kim Kramer from Space Up Close.
Hey, thank you for doing this and taking my question, and good luck with the launch. My question, I think, is for Steve and Bill. So do I understand it, 5 flights for Endeavour now is the limit of certification for this one. So what is the future? I think you're working on extending it. Can you tell us about that? How that works coming along and how many flights you might get out of it? And you're also building a new Dragon, Bill. When might that be ready? Thank you.
I can start, and then we'll let Bill add anything. So right now we're certified for 5 flights and on Dragon, and we're looking at extending that life out. I think the goal would be, for SpaceX to say 15 flights of Dragon. We may not get there in every single system. We're starting that. We're in the middle of doing that work. We're in the middle of going through all those components. Some are actually approved for 15 flights. Some we're still in the middle of working on. Some of those components had to go through some requalification to make sure that they could make it out to 15 flights. So we're in the middle of doing that. And then there is a new Dragon capsule in production at Hawthorne. Likely would fly on the Crew-10 flight would be the first flight of that, which would be in early 2025.
Yeah, our intent is to have that 5th vehicle ready for service sometime in this fall in 2024. So whenever NASA wants to go ahead and use that vehicle, it'll be available sometime this 4th quarter of this year.
Thank you.
And next we have Jim Siegel from NASATech.net.
Hi, everybody. Jim Siegel here, and thank you for taking my question. I think this one is for Emily. You mentioned that the crew was going to get a chance to spend some time with their families. And I can remember when the crew members were pretty much quarantined from everybody, including their families. And I wondered if you could describe the nature of how they're going to get together. Are they going to be seeing each other through over a glass wall or something? Or can they either talk to each other and touch each other? Or how's that going to work? Thank you.
Yeah, our quarantine program allows for several different layers of quarantine, and so some immediate family members go into quarantine with the astronauts, so they're able to spend time unmasked together at any time. Of course, those family members are kind of separated from the rest of the world while they're in quarantine, so not everybody, for example, school kids, are not able to necessarily do that, and so then we have a next layer down where you can quarantine a kind of partial quarantine, and then you can be in the same space with masks and with precautions, the 6-foot distancing we all got familiar with during the pandemic. And then you have just visits with folks that are not in quarantine at all, and that'll be behind at either a greater separation or behind glass. So with the family, there's usually several immediate family members that have gone into quarantine, and then some additional extended family members that they're able to be in the same room, just maybe not up close and personal.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And next we have Jeff Faust from Space News.
Hi. Follow-up for Steve from earlier question on certification. Is your expectations that you would increase the certification for Crew Dragon from 5 flights all the way to 15, or go to some intermediate step, like 7 or 10 flights, while you do additional work to get towards 15? Thanks.
I think it's probably too early to say where we end up, and I would say when we're doing this certification work, it's for both the Cargo Dragon and Crew Dragon. One of the benefits of SpaceX and our joint programs between myself and ISS, Joel, is that the vehicle is largely the same, whether it be a Crew Dragon or Cargo Dragon, and so we're doing that certification work together. I'm not quite sure where we're going to end up. It might be an intermediate value, somewhere in between 5 and 15. We'll just have to see component by component. Right now, we sort of have limitations on some components, right? The parachutes are brand new every time. We have limitations on the heat shield. We would fly a new heat shield every flight right now. Many components are already certified for 5 flights. Draco thrusters, for example, are limited by how many pulses they saw in flight as a life limit. So it's kind of a mixture, like I've seen in other programs, where some components need to be replaced every flight. Some will fly a little longer. I would like to get out to 7 to 10 flights per Dragon, but we'll see where we get to. So
the big advantage of reusability is we get the hardware back, and we can take a look at it in detail after these number of flights. And we may then pull a component off and actually do a detailed life extension qual program on a particular component that's flown 3 or 4 times to help give the data to NASA to take a look at whether they want to go ahead and certify the life to an extended period of time beyond the current 5 flight count we have today.
Thank you. And our last question this evening will come from Will Robinson-Smith at Spaceflight Now.
Hi, thanks for taking another question. Follow-up to Gina's, to both Steve and Bill, if I may. With the busyness of the pads and the work that's being done to get everything scheduled, along those lines, what is the timeline for the readiness of Pad 40 to support crew and cargo missions, and when is that capability expected to be rolled out? Could it be as early as CRS-30, or are you looking further down the road for that? Thanks.
I can start, and then we'll let Bill add. We're happy to have Pad 40 in place. The first flight of that right now is targeted to be CRS-30 coming up in March, and it's great, again, to have a cargo vehicle that's common. We can test that pad ahead of time with the cargo vehicle, and we did fly NG-20 off of that pad already, but a lot of the crew systems that are required at the pad, specifically for Dragon, were not tested with Northrop Grumman 20 flight. And then we're targeting to have it online by Crew-9 later this year for crew capability, and it's good to have that redundancy, and something could always happen to the systems at 39A, and so we're really happy to have that backup pad. We're going through that certification work now, where SpaceX is delivering all the certification data for the pad. Many of the systems are the same as what we have at 39A, but we're going through that work in the commercial crew program, and I'll see if Bill has anything to add.
No, I would say Steve's got it right. We're aiming for CRS-30 here. We've got a good plan laid out to get everything certified and ready to go fly for that time. Again, we'll see how the manifest shakes out and see where things move. There could be some advantage of moving cargo back even to 39A for CRS-30. If we see that advantage, we might make that move. So, but again, I think we're on track to head there. We would like to do a cargo flight first if we can, and we think CRS-30 is probably the right time to do that, and the work's pretty much complete at the pad. We've got some stuff to do next week, but we'll be in good shape for CRS-30.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to the media who took part. Again, Crew-8 on schedule to launch March 1st, 12:04 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
This concludes today's conference. You may disconnect at this time.